Why are the stories of so many powerful women lost to history? What happens when a woman rules in a world built by men? And how do you find the truth when their lives were recorded by the very people who wanted them to fail? Their legacies are often twisted, their strengths relabeled as flaws, but the facts of their reigns remain. They built cities, they commanded armies, they changed the laws, and they held nations together when everything was falling apart. Number 21, who was the last monarch of Hawaii? She was arrested and put on trial in her own throne room. The United States government officially apologized for its role in overthrowing her kingdom a full 100 years later. She composed over 160 songs and chants, including the famous Aloha Oe, which she wrote while imprisoned. Her name was Liliʻuokalani. She was born in 1838 in Honolulu into a family of high-ranking chiefs. Her birth name was Lydia Liliʻuokalani Wiwehi Kamakahia. As was tradition, she was adopted at birth by another chief, a common practice to strengthen bonds between noble families. She received a modern education, learning English, and studying at a missionary school. She became fluent in the language and customs of the West, but her heart was always Hawaiian. For most of her life, she wasn't expected to be queen. She was a composer, a musician, a pillar of her community. She married an American man, John Owen Dominus, which was a complicated relationship. He served in her family's government, but their personal connection was often strained. She traveled the world as a representative of the Hawaiian Kingdom. She attended Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in 1887. She met presidents and kings. She saw how the rest of the world worked, and she saw the growing influence of American business interests back home. These interests were mainly in sugar. American planters had become incredibly wealthy and powerful in Hawaii. They depended on a trade deal with the United States that allowed them to sell sugar without tariffs. But they wanted more. They wanted control. The Hawaiian monarchy, with its focus on native rights and sovereignty, stood in their way. In 1887, a group of these businessmen and politicians, backed by a militia called the Honolulu Rifles, forced her brother King Kalakaua to sign a new constitution. It was called the Bayonet Constitution. It stripped the monarchy of most of its power. It also took voting rights away from most native Hawaiians and all Asian immigrants, while giving them to wealthy white landowners. It was a power grab, plain and simple. When her brother died in 1891, Liliʻuokalani became queen. She knew what her people wanted. They wanted their rights back. They wanted to restore the power of the monarchy and their own voices in government. She began drafting a new constitution to replace the one forced upon her brother. This was her duty as a monarch. The sugar planters and their political allies saw this as a threat. They couldn't have a strong, popular queen undoing their control. So, in January 1893, they made their move. They formed a committee of safety. They claimed the queen was a danger, and that American lives and property were at risk. This was a pretext. John L. Stevens, the U.S. Minister to Hawaii, was an ally of the committee. He ordered U.S. Marines from the USS Boston to land in Honolulu. He said it was to protect Americans. But their presence had a clear effect. It intimidated the Queen's supporters and backed the coup. The Committee of Safety declared the monarchy overthrown and established a provisional government. They immediately sought annexation by the United States. Queen Liliʻuokalani faced an impossible choice. She could call her people to fight the well-armed militia and the U.S. Marines, leading to bloodshed. Or she could yield. She chose to yield her authority not to the provisional government, but to the United States. She trusted that the American government, once it understood the facts, would see the injustice and restore her to her throne. She wrote, "I yield to the superior force of the United States of America to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life." President Grover Cleveland, upon taking office, did investigate. He sent a commissioner who concluded that the overthrow was illegal and that Minister Stevens and American troops were responsible. Cleveland called it an act of war and tried to restore the Queen. But the provisional government, now calling itself the Republic of Hawaii and led by Sanford B. Dole of the Pineapple family, refused. They held the power on the ground, and Congress was not willing to use force against them. In 1895, a group of royalists staged a counter-revolution. It failed. Liliʻuokalani was arrested. They accused her of knowing about the plot, even though she didn't. They found weapons buried in the garden of her home. They put her on trial in the same throne room where she had once reigned. She was convicted and sentenced to 5 years of hard labor, though this was reduced to imprisonment in a single room in Iolani Palace. During her imprisonment, she was denied visitors and newspapers. To pass the time and preserve her culture, she composed music. She wrote down the history of her people. She sewed a massive quilt that told the story of her life and the overthrow of her kingdom. It was an act of defiance and remembrance. After nearly a year she was released, she never stopped fighting for her people. She went to Washington, D.C. to petition against annexation. She presented a petition signed by thousands of Native Hawaiians who opposed it. But the political climate had changed. With the Spanish-American War in 1898, Hawaii's strategic location in the Pacific became too valuable for the U.S. to pass up. President William McKinley signed a resolution and Hawaii was annexed. Liliʻuokalani lived out the rest of her life in Hawaii. She was a private citizen, but for her people, she was always their queen. She fought for the return of crown lands and for the rights of the deposed royal family. She died in 1917. Her story is not just about a kingdom lost. It's about a leader who chose peace over violence and who never gave up fighting for her nation's sovereignty, even after it was gone. Number 20. How did a woman from the steppes defeat a Persian king? Her kingdom was not made of stone cities, but of horses and open plains. She led a nomadic people known as the misrepresented. She is credited with defeating and killing Cyrus the Great, the founder of the mighty Persian Achaemenid Empire. This was Tomyris, a queen of the Scythian peoples in the 6th century BCE. Our main source for her story comes from the Greek historian Herodotus. So we have to remember, we are seeing her through the eyes of a Greek man writing about Persians and Scythians. The details might be embellished, but the core of the story speaks to a powerful female leader who defended her people against one of the most famous conquerors in history. The misrepresented lived in Central Asia, in the vast grasslands east of the Caspian Sea. They were skilled horse riders and archers. They were a tough people, used to a hard life. Tomyris became their queen after the death of her husband. Cyrus the Great had built a massive empire. He had conquered the Medes, the Lydians, and the Babylonians. He was a brilliant military strategist, and his army, the Immortals, seemed unstoppable. After securing his southern and western borders, he turned his attention northeast, towards the territory of the misrepresented. According to Herodotus, Cyrus's initial plan was not conquest, but marriage. He sent a proposal to Tomyris, asking for her hand. He wasn't interested in her as a wife. He was interested in her kingdom. A marriage would be a peaceful way to absorb her people into his empire. And Tomyris saw right through it. She knew he wanted her kingdom, not her. She rejected the offer and warned him to stay on his side of the river that marked their border. Cyrus was not used to being told no. He ignored her warning and began building a bridge to cross the river and invade. While he was doing this, Tomyris sent him a message. She was a direct and confident ruler. She told him to stop his work. She gave him a choice. Either he could let her people withdraw from the river and he could cross and fight them on her land, or he could withdraw and she would cross and fight him on his land. She basically offered him the choice of battlefield. Cyrus's advisors debated what to do. Most urged him to let Tomyris cross into Persian territory, but one advisor, a captured Lydian king named Croesus, suggested a different approach. He proposed a trick. He told Cyrus to cross the river, advance a little way, and then set up a camp filled with food and wine. He should leave his weakest soldiers behind and withdraw the main army. The misrepresented, Croesus argued, were not used to Persian luxuries. They would find the camp, feast on the food and wine, and become easy to overcome. Cyrus liked this plan. He crossed the river, set up the camp as suggested, and left his least effective soldiers there. A third of the misrepresented army, led by Tomyris' son, Spargapises, found the camp. As Croesus predicted, they ate and drank until they were unable to fight. Cyrus's main army returned and easily defeated them. Many were killed, and Spargapises was taken prisoner. When Tomyris heard what had happened, she was furious. She had been defeated by a trick, not by a fair fight. Her son had been captured. She sent a herald to Cyrus. Her message was stark. She called him bloodthirsty and demanded he return her son and leave her lands. She swore an oath, "If you do not, I swear by the sun, the lord of the Massagetae, that I will give you your fill of blood." Spargapises, once he was sober and realized his situation, asked Cyrus to be unbound. Cyrus agreed. As soon as he was free, Spargapises took his own life, ashamed of his capture. His death sealed Cyrus's fate. Tomyris gathered all her forces. She was no longer just defending her border. She was seeking justice for her son. She led her army against Cyrus. Herodotus describes the battle that followed as one of the fiercest ever fought between non-Greek peoples. The two armies first stood at a distance, firing arrows until their quivers were empty. Then they closed in, fighting with spears and daggers. The battle raged for a long time, with neither side giving way. In the end, the Massagetae prevailed. The Persian army was largely destroyed, and Cyrus the Great, the conqueror of empires, was killed. Tomyris searched the battlefield for his body. When she found it, she had it brought to her. She fulfilled her oath. She took a skin, filled it with human blood, and put Cyrus's head into it. Herodotus reports her saying, "I live and have conquered you in fight, and yet by you I am ruined, for you took my son with guile. But as I threatened, I give you your fill of blood." The story ends there. It's a brutal ending, but it shows a queen who was underestimated. Cyrus saw her as a woman, a potential wife to annex a kingdom. He didn't see her as a military equal. He used trickery because he perhaps doubted his ability to win in a straight fight. Tomyris proved him wrong. She was a ruler who protected her people, a mother who avenged her son, and a warrior who defeated one of history's greatest commanders. Number 19. Could a woman from a desert city challenge Rome? She created an empire that stretched from modern-day Turkey to Egypt. She was a scholar who could speak multiple languages, including Greek, Egyptian, and Aramaic. The coins minted during her reign show her image with the title of Augusta, or Empress. This was Zenobia, queen of the Palmyrene Empire in the 3rd century CE. Her city, Palmyra, was a wealthy oasis on the trade routes connecting the Roman Empire with Persia and the East. It was a place of immense wealth, a crossroads of cultures filled with stunning architecture. Palmyra was technically part of the Roman Empire, but it had a great deal of autonomy. Zenobia was born around 240 CE. She was well-educated, intelligent, and ambitious. She married the ruler of Palmyra, Odenathus. He was a loyal Roman ally who had been granted significant power by Rome for his help in fighting the Sasanian Persians. He was essentially the king of the Roman East. Zenobia was his second wife, and she was not just a quiet partner. She was deeply involved in politics and often rode with him into battle. In 267 CE, everything changed. Odenathus and his eldest son were assassinated. The reasons are murky, but it may have been a family dispute or a Roman plot. Suddenly, Zenobia was a widow. Her own son Vabaliathus was just a boy. The path of least resistance would have been to accept a new Roman governor and fade into obscurity. Zenobia did not choose that path. She immediately took power as regent for her son. She was not content to simply rule Palmyra. She had bigger plans. The Roman Empire was in a period of crisis. It was struggling with internal revolts, economic instability, and constant threats on its borders. Zenobia saw an opportunity. She began to expand her territory, not as a Roman ally, but for herself. She first moved south. In 270 CE, her army, led by her brilliant general Zabdas, conquered the Roman province of Arabia. Then they marched into Egypt, one of the most important provinces of the Roman Empire. Egypt was the breadbasket of Rome, the source of its grain supply. Zenobia's forces took control of Alexandria, the second largest city in the empire. She then moved north and west, taking over much of Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. In just a few years, she had forged a massive empire. She controlled the vital trade routes and the grain supply. She declared her son king of kings and began using the title of empress for herself. For a brief time, the Roman Empire was effectively split into three parts: the Gallic Empire in the west, the Central Roman Authority in Italy, and Zenobia's Palmyrene Empire in the east. King Zenobia was a capable ruler. She was known for being tolerant of her diverse subjects, which included Christians, Jews, and pagans. Her court was a center of learning, attracting philosophers and scholars. She claimed descent from Cleopatra, the famous queen of Egypt, linking herself to a powerful female predecessor who had also challenged Rome. But her success could not last. In 272 CE, a new Roman emperor, Aurelian, came to power. He was a career soldier, a tough and determined leader. His mission was to reunite the fractured empire. He first dealt with the Gallic Empire, then he turned his full attention to Zenobia. Aurelian marched east. Zenobia's armies met him in Anatolia. They fought two major battles, one at Ime and another at Emesa. In both battles, the Palmyrene forces, especially their heavy cavalry, fought fiercely, but Aurelian was a superior tactician. He managed to outmaneuver Zenobia's general and win decisive victories. After these defeats, Zenobia and her remaining forces retreated back to Palmyra. The city had strong walls and was prepared for a siege. It was located in the middle of a desert, making a long siege difficult for an attacking army. Zenobia was confident she could hold out. She also hoped for help from the Persians. Aurelian surrounded the city. The siege was tough, just as Zenobia had predicted. But Aurelian was relentless. He cut off Palmyrene supply lines and intercepted any potential Persian reinforcements. As the situation in the city grew desperate, Zenobia made a bold move. She and her son slipped out of the city on a fast camel, hoping to reach Persia and rally support. They were caught. Roman cavalry pursued them and captured them near the Euphrates River. With their queen captured, the city of Palmyra surrendered to Aurelian. What happened to Zenobia next is a matter of debate among historians. One version of the story says she was taken back to Rome. Aurelian celebrated a massive triumph, a parade to show off his victory, and Zenobia was the main attraction. She was allegedly paraded through the streets of Rome, bound in golden chains, dressed in her finest jewels. It was meant to be a display of Roman power over this defiant Eastern queen. But after the parade, this version continues, Aurelian was surprisingly lenient. He gave her a villa in Tivoli, near Rome. She lived out the rest of her life in comfort, and her children reportedly married into the Roman nobility. Another less common story suggests she died on the way to Rome, either from illness or by her own hand. Whatever her ultimate fate, Zenobia's story is remarkable. For a few short years, a woman from a desert trading city built an empire that rivaled Rome itself. She was a brilliant political and military operator who took advantage of a moment of weakness and almost succeeded in breaking away a third of the empire for herself. Number 18, what does it take to rule a golden age? She was the first woman to rule Georgia in her own right. During her reign, the kingdom reached the peak of its political and cultural power. She was so respected that her subjects called her King of Kings, using the masculine title because they had no word for a female ruler of her stature. Her name was Tamar, and she presided over Georgia's golden age in the 12th and 13th centuries. She was born around 1160, the daughter of King George III. Her father knew he had no sons to succeed him. He also knew that the Georgian nobility was powerful and fractious. They would likely object to being ruled by a woman. So, in 1178, he did something unprecedented. He had Tamar crowned as his co-ruler while he was still alive. This was a smart move. It forced the nobles to accept her authority and swear loyalty to her. When her father died in 1184, Tamar became the sole ruler. But the nobles immediately began to test her. They demanded concessions. They wanted to curb the power of the monarchy and increase their own. They insisted she dismiss the officials her father had appointed and let them choose her advisors. Tamar was young, in her early 20s. She had to be a shrewd politician to survive. She agreed to some of their demands to keep the peace. But she also maneuvered to place her own loyal supporters in key positions. The nobles also pressured her to marry. They wanted a king who could lead the army. They selected a candidate for her, a Rus's prince named Yuri Bogolyubsky. Tamar was reportedly not happy with the choice, but she consented for the good of the kingdom. The marriage was a disaster. Yuri was a skilled soldier, but he was also a difficult and unpleasant man. After about 2 years, Tamar divorced him and exiled him. This was an incredibly bold move for a female monarch in the 12th century. Yuri didn't accept his fate. He gathered allies and launched 2 separate rebellions to try and reclaim the throne. Both times, Tamar's loyal armies defeated him. Having secured her throne, Tamar made her own choice for her second husband. She chose David Soslan, a prince from a branch of her own dynasty. It was a love match, but also a politically astute one. He was a respected military commander, but he understood that Tamar was the true ruler. He was her consort, not her co-king. They had 2 children, a son named George and a daughter named Rusudan. With her domestic situation stabilized, Tamar focused on foreign policy. Georgia was a Christian kingdom surrounded by powerful Muslim states. Under Tamar's leadership, Georgian armies began a series of successful campaigns. They expanded the kingdom's borders, securing its position as the most powerful state in the Caucasus region. They conquered territories in what is now Armenia, Azerbaijan, and northeastern Turkey. They created a protectorate called the Empire of Trebizond on the Black Sea coast, which was ruled by her relatives. But Tamar's reign was not just about military conquest. It was a time of incredible cultural flourishing. Monasteries were built across the kingdom. Metalwork, especially in gold and silver, reached new heights of artistry. The legal system was reformed, and it was during her reign that Georgia's national epic poem, The Knight in the Panther's Skin by Shota Rustaveli, was written. The poem, which celebrates ideals of chivalry, friendship, and enlightened rule, was dedicated to Queen Tamar. Tamar was known for her piety and her justice. She was a devout Christian and supported the church, but she also protected the rights of her Muslim and Jewish subjects. She was seen as a protector of the poor and the downtrodden. Chronicles from the time praise her wisdom, her generosity, and her leadership. She ruled for 29 years, from 1184 to 1213. When she died, the entire kingdom mourned. According to legend, she was buried in a secret location to prevent her tomb from being desecrated by her enemies. Her grave has never been found. The period after her death saw the decline of Georgia's power, particularly with the arrival of the Mongol invasions. This makes her reign seem even more exceptional in hindsight. She inherited a strong kingdom, but she was the one who navigated the treacherous politics of the nobility, secured her own power, and led her nation to its greatest heights. She was not just a queen who happened to be a woman. She was a king in her own right, one of the most successful rulers in her country's history. Number 17. How did a Celtic queen take on the Roman army? She led a massive uprising against the Roman Empire. Her forces destroyed 3 major Roman cities, including Londinium, which is now London. The ancient Roman historians estimated that her army killed between 70,000 and 80,000 Romans and their supporters. This was Boudica, the queen of the Iceni tribe of Celtic Britons in the 1st century CE. Her story is one of defiance against a superpower. Our knowledge of her comes almost entirely from 2 Roman historians, Tacitus and Cassius Dio. They were her enemies, so their accounts are biased, but they still paint a picture of a formidable leader. The Iceni were a tribe who lived in what is now Norfolk, in eastern England. Initially, they were allies of Rome. When the Romans conquered Britain in 43 CE, the Iceni king Prasutagus was allowed to remain as a client king. This was a common Roman practice. They would let local rulers keep their thrones as long as they were loyal to Rome and paid their taxes. That Prasutagus was a wealthy man. He knew that when he died, Rome might simply absorb his kingdom. To try and protect his family and his people, he made a will. In it, he left his kingdom jointly to the Roman emperor and his own 2 daughters. He hoped this would satisfy Rome and ensure that his family would be looked after. He was wrong. When he died around 60 CE, the Romans ignored his will. They decided to annex the Iceni kingdom completely. Roman officials moved in. They treated the Iceni lands as conquered territory. They seized the property of the Iceni nobles. According to Tacitus, things got much worse. He wrote that the kingdom was plundered. Boudica, Prasutagus' widow, was publicly flogged. Her 2 daughters were assaulted. This was a profound humiliation, not just for the royal family, but for the entire Iceni tribe. For the Romans, it was a show of dominance. For the Iceni, it was an unforgivable act of brutality and disrespect. It was the spark that lit the fire of rebellion. Boudica was not a passive victim, she was a leader. She began to rally her people. She also formed an alliance with a neighboring tribe, the Trinovantes, who had their own grievances with the Romans. The Romans had built a colony for their retired soldiers at Camulodunum, modern Colchester, on Trinovantes' land. They had also constructed a large temple dedicated to the former Emperor Claudius, which was a major financial burden on the local population. With a huge army of Britons at her back, Boudica launched her attack. Her first target was Camulodunum. The city was poorly defended. It was a settlement for veterans, not an active military fort. The rebels stormed the city, burning it to the ground. They targeted the Temple of Claudius, a symbol of Roman oppression. The defenders held out in the temple for 2 days before they were overwhelmed. The Roman governor of Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was away in Wales, campaigning against the Druids on the island of Anglesey. When he heard news of the revolt, he rushed back. He marched towards Londinium, a thriving commercial center. But he realized he didn't have enough soldiers to defend it. He made the cold, calculated decision to abandon the city to save his army. He allowed any inhabitants who could travel with him to leave, but many were left behind. Boudica's army descended on Londinium. They showed no mercy, the city was burned, and its inhabitants were killed. From there, the rebels marched to Verulamium, modern St. Albans, another major Roman town. They destroyed it as well. In a short amount of time, a huge swath of Roman Britain had been devastated. The rebellion was a serious threat to Roman control of the province. Suetonius had finally gathered his forces. He had one full legion and parts of others, totaling about 10,000 men. Boudica's army was much, much larger. Some estimates say it could have been over 100,000 strong. The two armies met at a location we no longer know, somewhere along the Roman road now called Watling Street. Suetonius chose his ground carefully. He picked a narrow gorge with a forest behind him. This meant the Britons could not use their superior numbers to surround him. They had to attack him head-on. Before the battle, Boudica is said to have addressed her troops from a chariot with her daughters beside her. Tacitus gives her a powerful speech. She spoke of the injustices they had suffered. She declared that she was not fighting for lost wealth, but for their freedom. She said it was better to die free than to live as slaves. The Britons were confident. They had brought their families in wagons to watch the victory, parking them at the rear of their army. This would prove to be a fatal mistake. The battle began. The Britons charged forward. The Romans held their ground, protected by the narrow terrain. They waited until the Britons were close, then threw their javelins. The javelins punched through the Britons' shields and caused chaos in their ranks. Then the Romans advanced in a tight, disciplined wedge formation. The superior training, armor, and tactics of the Roman legionaries were devastating against the tribal warriors. The Britons tried to flee, but their retreat was blocked by their own wagons. The Roman cavalry chased them down. The result was a total Roman victory. Roman sources claim that 80,000 Britons were killed, with very few Roman casualties. These numbers are likely exaggerated, but the defeat was absolute. What happened to Boudica? Tacitus says she poisoned herself to avoid being captured. Cassius Dio says she fell ill and died. Either way, her rebellion was over. The aftermath was harsh. The Romans cracked down on the remaining hostile tribes. But the rebellion also had a long-term effect. It showed the Romans that their rule could be brutal and that it could provoke a violent response. Future governors were often more conciliatory. Boudica had lost the battle, but her story was remembered. She became a symbol of the fight for freedom and justice, a queen who dared to challenge the mightiest empire in the world. Number 16, what happens when you put an actress on the throne? She was a dancer and actress from a humble background, a profession considered scandalous at the time. She became one of the most powerful empresses in the history of the Byzantine Empire. During a massive riot that nearly toppled the throne, she was the one who convinced her husband, the emperor, to stay and fight rather than flee. Her name was Theodora, and she was the wife of Emperor Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 CE. Her story is a remarkable tale of social mobility and political influence. Most of what we know about her early life comes from a book called The Secret History by the historian Procopius. He wrote it in private and filled it with scandalous gossip, so it has to be read with caution, but it gives us a glimpse into her origins. According to Procopius, Theodora's father was a bear keeper for the Hippodrome, the massive chariot racing stadium in Constantinople. When he died, her mother was left to raise 3 daughters. Theodora and her sisters were put on the stage at a young age. She became a popular performer, known for her beauty, wit, and comedic timing. It was in this world that she met Justinian. He was the nephew and heir of the reigning emperor Justin. He was captivated by her. He fell deeply in love with her. But there was a problem. A Roman law prevented men of senatorial rank from marrying actresses. Justinian was far above that rank. So he had his uncle, the emperor, change the law specifically so he could marry Theodora. They were married around 525 CE. 2 years later, Justin died, and Justinian and Theodora were crowned emperor and empress. From the very beginning, it was clear that Theodora was not going to be a ceremonial empress. Justinian treated her as his intellectual and political partner. Her name appears in almost all the laws he passed. He consulted her on major decisions. She had her own court, her own officials, and her own agenda. Her most famous moment came in 532 CE during the Nika riots. The riots started in the Hippodrome between 2 rival chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens. But it quickly spiraled into a full-blown insurrection against Justinian's government. The crowds were angry about high taxes and a corrupt official. They burned down large parts of the city, including the original Hagia Sophia church. They even crowned a new emperor. As Justinian and his top advisors were terrified, they were holed up in the palace, listening to the mob outside. Their plan was to gather their treasure and flee the city by sea. The ships were ready. At a council meeting, everyone agreed that escape was the only option. And then Theodora spoke. Procopius records her speech. She said that this was not the time to run, even if it was the safe thing to do. She said she would not go. She argued that it was better to die as a ruler than to live as an exile. She ended with a famous line saying that royal purple makes a fine burial shroud. Her courage and determination shamed the men in the room. Her speech changed everything. Justinian was inspired to stay. He ordered his 2 best generals, Belisarius and Mundus, to take action. They gathered loyal troops, entered the Hippodrome where the rioters were gathered, and suppressed the revolts. The Nika riots were crushed. Justinian's throne was saved, and he owed it to his wife. After this, Theodora's influence only grew. She was a champion of social causes, particularly those affecting women. She passed laws that increased the rights of women in divorce cases. She made it illegal for women to be forced into prostitution. She created a convent, a safe house for former prostitutes to live and rebuild their lives. She was also deeply involved in the religious debates of the time. She supported a faction of Christianity called Miaphysitism, which was at odds with the official state church. She used her power to protect Miaphysite bishops and monks from persecution. She was a shrewd politician. She had her own network of spies and informants. She was not afraid to get involved in palace intrigue and to remove officials she saw as a threat. Some saw her as ruthless and manipulative, but she was a survivor in a dangerous political world. Theodora died in 548 CE, likely from cancer. Justinian was devastated. He outlived her by nearly 20 years, but he never remarried. He continued to pass laws that he said were in her memory. Without Theodora, the reign of Justinian would have been very different. He might not have even kept his throne. She was his partner in every sense of the word. She was a co-ruler who helped him navigate one of the most brilliant and tumultuous periods in Byzantine history. Her journey from the stage of the Hippodrome to the throne of the empire is one of the most extraordinary in royal history. Number 15, how does a concubine become an emperor? She was the only woman in the entire history of China to rule as emperor in her own right. She created her own dynasty, the Zhou. She started her life in the imperial court as a low-ranking concubine. Her name was Wu Zetian. She ruled China during the Tang dynasty, first as an empress consort, then as a regent for her sons, and finally from 690 to 705 CE as the sovereign ruler. Her story is one of incredible ambition, political skill, and ruthlessness. She was born in 624 CE to a wealthy and aristocratic family. At the age of 14, she was selected to be a concubine for Emperor Taizong. She was beautiful and intelligent, but she was not one of his favorites. She was given the rank of a fifth-grade concubine, which was not very high. She did not have any children with him. When Emperor Taizong died in 649, all of his childless concubines were sent to a Buddhist monastery to live out their days as nuns. This was standard practice. For most women, this would have been the end of their story, but Wu Zetian was not most women. While in the palace, she had caught the eye of the crown prince, Li Ji. It was a forbidden attraction, as she was technically one of his father's wives. When Li Ji became the new Emperor Gaozong, he did not forget about her. He visited her at the monastery and eventually brought her back to the palace. This was a highly unusual move. She re-entered the court as a concubine of the new emperor. She quickly outmaneuvered her rivals. Her main opponents were the current Empress Wang and the high-ranking consort Xiao. Through a series of brilliant and ruthless political moves, she managed to discredit both of them. In 655 CE, Emperor Gaozong deposed Empress Wang and made Wu Zetian his new empress consort. As empress, she was not content to stay in the background. Emperor Gaozong was often in poor health. He suffered from strokes that affected his eyesight and his ability to govern. He began to rely more and more on his wife. She proved to be an exceptionally capable administrator. She sat in on court meetings, often behind a screen, and advised him on all matters of state. They were effectively ruling as a team. Her influence grew immense. She consolidated her power by eliminating her political rivals. She had many high-ranking officials and members of the imperial family who opposed her either exiled or executed. She created a secret police force to root out any opposition. Traditional Confucian historians, who believed a woman's place was in the home, painted her as a cruel and power-hungry tyrant. They accused her of many terrible deeds to secure her power. When Emperor Gaozong died in 683, their son Li Xian became Emperor Zhongzong. But he was emperor in name only. Wu Zetian ruled as Empress Dowager and Regent. When her son started to assert his own authority and appoint his wife's relatives to high office, she acted swiftly. Within weeks, she had him deposed and put under house arrest. She replaced him with his younger brother, Li Dan, who became Emperor Ruzong. He was even more of a puppet than his brother. He was kept in a separate part of the palace and was not allowed to participate in government. Wu Zetian now ruled openly and completely. For several years, she ruled as regent, but she was preparing for something more. She began a clever propaganda campaign to justify a woman taking the throne. She commissioned scholars to write biographies of exemplary women. She circulated stories that she was the reincarnation of a bodhisattva, a divine figure in Buddhism. She even had a Buddhist sutra discovered that predicted the coming of a female sovereign. In 690 CE, she felt the time was right. She forced her son, Emperor Ruzong, to abdicate. She then declared herself Empress Regnant, the founder of a new dynasty, the Zhou. She was now the absolute ruler of China. As Emperor, Wu Zetian was a skilled and effective ruler. She reformed the civil service examination system to allow talented men from lower classes to enter the government, reducing the power of the old aristocratic families. She promoted economic development and supported Buddhism, making it the state religion over Taoism. She was a patron of art and scholarship. Her reign was generally a time of peace and prosperity. She also proved to be a good judge of talent, appointing many capable men as her chancellors. She ruled as emperor for 15 years. By the time she was in her 80s, her health was failing. Court officials grew worried about the influence of her favorites, the Zhang brothers. In 705, a group of officials staged a coup. They executed the Zhang brothers and forced the ailing Wu Zetian to abdicate in favor of her son, the former Emperor Zhongzong, whom she had deposed years earlier. This restored the Tang dynasty. She died later that same year. Her final wish was that the title of emperor be removed, and that she be buried as empress consort to Emperor Gaozong. It was a final, complicated gesture. Wu Zetian's legacy is complex. For centuries, she was condemned by Confucian historians as a usurper and a tyrant. But in more recent times, she has been reevaluated. She was a woman who broke every rule to reach the pinnacle of power. She was ruthless with her enemies, but she also governed China effectively for decades. She remains the only woman to have ever held the title of Huangdi, Emperor of China. Number 14, could a queen strategy defeat a modern European army? She was the co-founder of Ethiopia's modern capital, Addis Ababa. She was a brilliant military strategist who played a crucial role in defeating an Italian invasion force. She commanded her own army on the battlefield from a young age. This was Taitu Batul, Empress of Ethiopia and wife of Emperor Menelik II. She was a major political force in her own right, and one of the key figures behind the Ethiopian victory at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a landmark event in the history of African resistance to European colonialism. Taitu was born in 1851 into a powerful aristocratic family in northern Ethiopia. Her family claimed descent from the Solomonic dynasty. She was well-educated, literate, and deeply religious. Unlike many women of her time, she was also trained in military and political strategy. She was married several times before she met Menelik, who was then the king of Shiwa, a region in central Ethiopia. They married in 1883. It was a political alliance, but it grew into a strong partnership. Taitu was intelligent, strong-willed, and deeply suspicious of European intentions in Africa. Menelik was more trusting and open to diplomacy. They complemented each other. Taitu often took a harder line in negotiations, pushing Menelik to be cautious. In 1889, Menelik became Emperor of Ethiopia. That same year, he signed the Treaty of Wukal with Italy. This treaty was meant to define the relationship between the two countries. The problem was, there were two versions of the treaty, one in Amharic, the Ethiopian language, and one in Italian. The Amharic version stated that Ethiopia could use the Italian government to conduct its foreign affairs if it wished. The Italian version used a word that meant Ethiopia must use the Italian government. This difference in a single verb was crucial. The Italian version effectively made Ethiopia a protectorate of Italy. When Taitu learned of the discrepancy, she was furious. She saw it as a deliberate trick by the Italians to colonize Ethiopia through a fraudulent treaty. She became the leading voice in the imperial court, urging Menelik to reject the Italian interpretation. She famously told the Italian envoy, "You want to make Ethiopia your protectorate, but that will never be." She pushed her husband to publicly renounce the treaty. Her firm stance earned her the respect of many Ethiopians who saw her as a guardian of their nation's independence. The Italians were not happy. They decided to impose their will by force. In late 1895, an Italian army invaded Ethiopia from their colony in Eritrea. Emperor Menelik II issued a mobilization order, calling on all able-bodied men to defend their country. He gathered a massive army, estimated at around 100,000 soldiers. Taitu did not just stay behind in the capital. She marched with the army. She commanded her own force of several thousand soldiers. She was a key part of the military leadership. She helped plan the logistics for feeding and supplying the enormous army as it marched north to meet the Italians. This was a huge undertaking, and her administrative skills were vital. She also played a direct role in military strategy. At one point, the Italians had occupied a fort at Mekelle. The fort had a secure water supply, which would allow the Italians to hold out for a long time. Taitu suggested a plan. She had her soldiers find the source of the fort's water supply and cut it off. After a 2-week siege without water, the Italian garrison was forced to surrender. It was a major victory for the Ethiopians and a big morale booster. The final showdown came on March 1st, 1896 at Adwa. The Italian army, under General Oreste Baratieri, had about 17,000 men. They had modern rifles, machine guns, and artillery. The Ethiopian army was much larger, but many of their soldiers were armed with spears and older firearms. The Italians underestimated the Ethiopians. They thought their superior technology would give them an easy victory. The battle was a disaster for the Italians. The Ethiopian forces, guided by Menelik, Taitu, and other commanders, used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They drew the Italians into a series of valleys where their numbers and fighting spirit overwhelmed the technologically superior invaders. Taytu was present on the battlefield, directing her own troops and offering strategic advice. By the end of the day, the Italian army was routed. It was a stunning and decisive victory for Ethiopia. It was one of the first times a non-European power had defeated a modern European army in a major battle. The victory at Adwa secured Ethiopia's independence. It was the only African nation, aside from Liberia, to successfully resist European colonization during the scramble for Africa. Taytu Batul's role in this was critical. She was the one who first recognized the danger of the Italian treaty. She was the one who pushed for a strong, uncompromising defense of Ethiopian sovereignty, and she was on the front lines both as a logistician and a commander during the war. After the victory, Taytu remained a powerful figure. She was also instrumental in the founding and development of Addis Ababa. The area was chosen by Menelik, but it was Taytu who saw the potential of the hot springs on a nearby mountain. She built a house there and began to develop the area, which she named Addis Ababa, meaning new flower. Her legacy is immense. She was a queen who was not afraid to challenge her husband, to stand up to a foreign power, and to lead her people on the battlefield. She was a true co-ruler and a defender of her nation's freedom. Number 13, how did a warrior queen build a 300-mile wall? She ruled a Hausa city-state in what is now Nigeria for 34 years. She was a brilliant military commander who never married or had children, choosing to dedicate her life to her kingdom. She is credited with building a vast network of earthen walls around her cities and conquered territories. Her name was Amina, Queen of Zazzau. She lived in the 16th century, though the exact dates are debated by historians. Her story is a mix of historical fact and oral legend passed down through generations. She is a celebrated hero in Nigerian history. Amina was born around 1533 in Zazzau, one of the original 7 Hausa states. Her family was a ruling family. Her mother was a queen named Bakwa Turunku. From a young age, Amina showed a keen interest in military matters. While her brother Karama was the heir, Amina was learning to fight. She trained with the soldiers of Zazzau and became a skilled warrior. When her brother became king in 1566, Amina emerged as the leading warrior of his army. She led his cavalry in numerous military campaigns. She became famous for her bravery and her military prowess. She was a respected and feared commander. In 1576, her brother died. Amina, now 43 years old, and with years of military experience, ascended to the throne. She became the Queen of Zazzau. She did not waste any time. Just 3 months after becoming queen, she launched her first military campaign. And she didn't stop for the next 34 years. Her goal was expansion and trade. She wanted to extend Zazzau's borders and control the lucrative trade routes that crossed the region. These routes carried goods like salt, metals, horses, and kola nuts. By controlling them, she could make her kingdom incredibly wealthy. She led her army herself. She personally commanded her forces in battle after battle. She conquered large territories, extending her rule as far as the Niger River in the south and incorporating the city-states of Kano and Katsina into her domain. The lands she controlled were vast. The praise singers over time said that the whole of the products of the south came to her, and the whole of the products of the west. The rulers of conquered lands paid tribute to her. To consolidate her conquests, Amina developed a unique defensive strategy. After conquering a town, she would have her army build a fortified earthen wall around it. These walls, known as Amina's Walls, or Ganyuwar Amina, became her trademark. They were tall and thick, designed to protect the cities from invaders. Parts of these walls still exist today in cities like Zaria. This building campaign was a massive undertaking, requiring huge amounts of labor and resources. It not only protected her empire, but also served as a clear symbol of her power and authority. Amina never married. The legends say she took a temporary husband from the ranks of the men she defeated in each town she conquered, but this is likely just a story. What is clear is that she remained single and focused solely on her role as a ruler and a warrior. This was highly unusual for the time. She broke with tradition and defined her own path. Her 34-year reign was a period of constant warfare, but also of great prosperity and power for Zazao. She introduced the cultivation of kola nuts to the area, which became an important cash crop. She strengthened her kingdom's military and its economy. Her death is like her life surrounded by legend. It is said that she died during a military campaign at a place called Atiagar near modern-day Bida in Nigeria. She was in her 70s, still leading her army. Amina's legacy is powerful. She is remembered as a heroic figure, a queen who was a greater warrior than any king of her time. She expanded her kingdom, built lasting fortifications, and brought wealth to her people. She defied gender expectations and proved that a woman could be a brilliant and successful military and political leader. In Nigeria, she is often called Amina, a woman as capable as a man. Number 12. Can a saint be a ruthless political operator? She established her nation's first legal code. She was the first ruler of her people to convert to Christianity, a decision that shaped the future of her country for centuries. And before all that, she orchestrated a series of brutal acts to consolidate her power and avenge her husband's death. This is Olga of Kiev, who ruled Kievan Rusas as regent in the 10th century. Her story is a stark example of the transition from a pagan tribal world to a Christian state-run society. She is venerated as a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church for bringing Christianity to her land. But the story of how she came to power is a tale of cold, calculated revenge. Olga was born around 900 CE. We don't know much about her early life. She was married to Igor, the ruler of Kievan Rusas, a state centered around modern-day Kyiv in Ukraine. In 945, Igor went to collect tribute from a tribe under his rule, the Drevlians. He was notoriously greedy. After collecting the normal amount of tribute, he decided on his way home to go back and demand more. The Drevlians were enraged. They captured Igor and had him killed. With Igor dead, their son Sviatoslav was only 3 years old. This left Olga as the regent. The Drevlians saw an opportunity. They had killed the king. Now they wanted to control the kingdom. They sent a delegation of their 20 best men to Kiev by boat. Their proposal was audacious. They wanted Olga to marry their own prince, Prince Mal. This would effectively give them control over Kievan Rusas. Olga met the Drevlian envoys. She appeared to welcome their proposal. She told them she was honored. She said they should return to their boat and wait. The next day, she would have her people carry them in their boat to her court, a great sign of respect. The Drevlians were pleased. The next day, as promised, the people of Kiev carried the Drevlians in their boat. But they didn't carry them to the palace. They carried them to a deep trench that Olga had ordered dug the night before. They threw the boat and the men into the trench and buried them alive. Olga then sent a message to the Drevlians. She told them she accepted the proposal, but she needed them to send their most distinguished men to accompany her on the journey to their prince. The Drevlians, not knowing what had happened to the first delegation, proudly sent a group of their chieftains. When these men arrived, Olga ordered a bathhouse to be prepared for them so they could wash before meeting her. While the Drevlian chieftains were inside washing, Olga's men locked the doors and set the building on fire. She wasn't finished. She sent another message to the Drevlians. She said she was on her way and that they should prepare a great funeral feast in their capital, Iskorostan, to honor her dead husband, Igor. The Drevlians, still unaware of the fate of their two delegations, did as she asked. Olga arrived with a small group of soldiers. She joined the feast and encouraged the Drevlians to drink heavily. When they were drunk and unarmed, she gave a signal to her soldiers. They fell upon the Drevlians and, according to the ancient chronicles, killed 5,000 of them. After this, Olga's army laid siege to the city of Iskorostan. The siege lasted for a year. The city would not fall, so Olga resorted to another clever and brutal trick. She sent a message to the people of the city. She told them she had avenged her husband and no longer sought revenge. All she wanted was a small tribute. She asked for 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. The people of Iskorostan, desperate to end the siege, happily agreed. Your Olga had her soldiers take the birds. She then ordered them to attach a piece of sulfur bound with cloth to each bird's leg. At nightfall, they lit the sulfur and released the birds. The birds flew back to their nests in the houses, barns, and haylofts of the city. The entire city of Iskarostan went up in flames. As the people fled the burning city, Olga's soldiers captured them. Some were killed, others were taken as slaves. With the Drevlians crushed, Olga's power as regent was absolute. No one dared to challenge her again. The chronicles that tell this story were written by monks centuries later. They tell it not as a story of cruelty, but as a story of a clever and strong ruler defending her son's inheritance. Having secured her rule through these violent acts, Olga's reign changed dramatically. She proved to be a remarkably skilled administrator. She traveled throughout her lands, establishing a new system of governance. She set up administrative centers and replaced the chaotic tribute system with a regular, predictable system of taxation. This was the first legal and governmental reform in the history of Kievan Russes. She laid the foundations of a stable state. Around the year 957, Olga traveled to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. There, she converted to Orthodox Christianity. She was baptized by the patriarch, and the emperor himself stood as her godfather. She took the Christian name Helena. She returned to Kiev and tried to convert her son Sviatoslav. He refused. He was a pagan warrior and worried that his soldiers would not respect him if he adopted a new religion. But Olga's conversion was a pivotal moment. She brought priests and Christian texts back with her. While it would be her grandson, Vladimir the Great, who would make Christianity the state religion, it was Olga who planted the seed. Olga ruled as regent until her son was old enough to take power. Even then, when he was away on his many military campaigns, she managed the state. She died in 969. For her work in bringing Christianity to her land, she was later canonized as a saint. Her story is a jarring one. She is both a saint and a figure of incredible ruthlessness, a woman who used fire and trickery to secure her power, and then used that power to build a state and change the course of her nation's history. Number 11, how do you resist a superpower for 40 years? She was a brilliant diplomat who negotiated with the Portuguese as an equal. She was a master of espionage and guerrilla warfare. When she was forced from her kingdom, she created a new one and continued to fight for the freedom of her people for decades. Her name was Nzinga Mbande, the queen of the Ndongo and Matamba kingdoms in 17th century Angola. She spent nearly her entire life fighting against the Portuguese and their attempts to colonize her land and enslave her people. Nzinga was born around 1583. Her father was the king of Ndongo. From a young age, she was involved in the politics of the kingdom. She was intelligent, a skilled negotiator, and she received military training. She witnessed firsthand the growing threat of the Portuguese. The Portuguese had established a colony in the region, centered at Luanda. Their main interest was the slave trade. They would raid inland territories or make deals with local chiefs to capture people and sell them into slavery. In 1622, Nzinga's brother, now the king, sent her to Luanda to negotiate a peace treaty with the Portuguese governor. This meeting became legendary. The Portuguese governor, trying to show his superiority, had set up only one chair in the room for himself. Nzinga was expected to stand. Instead of accepting this insult, Nzinga calmly gestured to one of her servants. The servant got down on her hands and knees, and Nzinga sat on her back as if it were a throne. She then negotiated with the governor as an equal. She was successful in getting the Portuguese to agree to a treaty, though they later broke it. A few years later, her brother died. Nzinga became queen. The Portuguese refused to recognize her as the legitimate ruler. They supported a rival claimant to the throne. They wanted a puppet ruler they could control. They declared war on her. Nzinga was a formidable military leader. For several years, she led her armies against the Portuguese. She used guerrilla tactics, launching surprise attacks, and then disappearing into the landscape she knew so well. But the Portuguese had superior firepower and allies among other African groups. Eventually, she was forced to retreat from her kingdom of Ndongo. But Nzinga was not defeated. She led her followers east and conquered the nearby kingdom of Matamba. She established a new power base there. Matamba became a haven for those escaping the Portuguese and the slave trade. She welcomed runaway slaves into her army and her kingdom. From Matamba, she continued her resistance. She was incredibly adaptable. She formed new alliances. For a time, she allied herself with the Dutch, who were rivals of the Portuguese and had captured Luanda. She used this alliance to put more pressure on the Portuguese. She also used her intelligence network to stir up trouble for the Portuguese within their own territories. She was a ruler who was willing to do whatever it took to protect her people. She adopted new military strategies and even new cultural practices to strengthen her kingdom. She ruled for over 3 decades from Matamba, a constant thorn in the side of the Portuguese. Nzinga was a complex figure. She was a devout leader of her people's traditional religion for most of her life, but later in life she converted to Christianity, using it as a diplomatic tool to try and secure a lasting peace with the Portuguese. She wanted her kingdom to be recognized as a sovereign Christian state, which would make it harder for the Portuguese to justify their wars against her. Finally, in 1656, after nearly 40 years of war, a peace treaty was signed. Nzinga was an old woman by now. The Portuguese officially recognized her as the Queen of Matamba and Ndongo. They agreed to limit their slaving activities. It wasn't a total victory, but she had fought one of the most powerful empires in the world to a standstill. She had preserved a measure of independence for her people. She spent the last years of her life rebuilding her kingdom. She focused on trade and encouraging former slaves to settle in her lands. She died in 1663, in her 80s. She left behind a stable and powerful kingdom. Nzinga's legacy is immense. She was a master of diplomacy, a brilliant military strategist, and a symbol of resistance. For 40 years, she outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought the Portuguese. She is remembered as one of the greatest leaders in African history, a queen who dedicated her life to the fight against colonialism and for the freedom of her people. Number 10. How does a pharaoh get erased from history? She ruled Egypt for over 2 decades, one of the longest reigns of any female pharaoh. Her reign was a time of peace, prosperity, and incredible artistic and architectural achievement. Yet, after her death, her successor tried to systematically remove her name and image from every monument in Egypt. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she was a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, ruling in the 15th century BCE. Her story is one of ambition, power, and a mysterious attempt to erase her from memory. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose. She was of pure royal blood. She married her half-brother Thutmose II, as was common for Egyptian royalty. They had one daughter. When Thutmose II died after a short reign, the heir to the throne was a young boy, also named Thutmose, who was the son of a minor wife. This was Thutmose III. Because Thutmose III was just a child, Hatshepsut became his regent. She was meant to rule in his name until he came of age. This was a traditional and accepted role for a royal woman, but Hatshepsut had other plans. She was not content to be a temporary placeholder. Within a few years, she did something unprecedented. She had herself crowned as pharaoh. She became the senior co-ruler with her stepson as her junior partner. She adopted the full titles and regalia of a male pharaoh. In statues and reliefs, she was often depicted with a male body wearing the traditional kilt and the false beard of a king. This was not about her personal identity. It was a political statement. You know, the role of pharaoh was a male role. To be a legitimate pharaoh, she had to be depicted as a king. To justify her rule, she claimed that the god Amun-Ra had appeared to her mother in the form of her father, and that she was the divine offspring. She had this story carved into the walls of her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. This was a powerful piece of propaganda, asserting her right to rule not just by blood, but by divine will. Her reign, which lasted for about 22 years, was not one of military conquest. It was a period of peace and economic prosperity. She focused on rebuilding Egypt's trade networks, which had been disrupted by earlier conflicts. Her most famous achievement was a massive trading expedition to the land of Punt. We're not exactly sure where Punt was, but it was likely somewhere on the coast of East Africa. 5 large ships sailed south. The expedition was a huge success. They came back laden with exotic goods, incense, myrrh, ebony, ivory, gold, and wild animals. Most remarkably, they brought back live myrrh trees, which were then planted in the gardens of her temple. The entire story of the expedition is documented in detailed carvings on the walls of her temple at Deir el-Bahri. She was also a prolific builder. She commissioned hundreds of construction projects throughout Egypt. She erected towering obelisks at the Temple of Karnak, the most important religious center in Egypt. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri is one of the most beautiful and impressive structures of ancient Egypt. It's a terraced temple carved into the side of a cliff. Its design was revolutionary for its time. Throughout her reign, her stepson, Thutmose III, was growing up. He was not pushed aside completely. He was the head of the army. When Hatshepsut died around 1458 BCE, Thutmose III finally became the sole pharaoh. He would go on to become one of Egypt's greatest military leaders, often called the Napoleon of Egypt. But about 20 years into his own reign, Thutmose III began a campaign to erase Hatshepsut from history. Her name was chiseled off stone monuments, her statues were smashed and buried, her image was replaced with his own or his father's. The goal was to make it seem as if he had succeeded his father, Thutmose II, directly, and that her reign had never happened. Why did he do this? The reason is still debated by Egyptologists. It probably wasn't personal hatred. If it were, he likely would have done it immediately after her death, not 20 years later. One theory is that it was a political move. A female pharaoh was a disruption to the traditional order. By erasing her, Thutmose III may have been trying to restore the conventional line of male succession, to ensure that no woman would try to become pharaoh again. He wanted to make sure his own son's succession was secure. For thousands of years his plan worked. Hatshepsut was largely forgotten. Her name was missing from the official king lists. It wasn't until the 19th century, when archaeologists began to decipher hieroglyphs and excavate her temple, that her story was pieced back together. They found the smashed statues and the defaced carvings. They realized that there had been a powerful female pharaoh whose legacy had been deliberately hidden. Today, Hatshepsut is recognized as one of the most successful pharaohs of the New Kingdom. Her magnificent temple still stands. The obelisks she raised at Karnak still point to the sky. Despite the attempt to erase her, her story of ambition, power, and architectural genius has been reclaimed. Number 9. What makes a queen the great? She ruled Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, uniting all of Scandinavia under a single crown. She was never officially crowned as queen, ruling instead as regent for her son and then her adopted heir. She was a master of diplomacy and political strategy, achieving through negotiation what others sought through war. Her name was Margaret I, and she was the architect of the Kalmar Union in the late 14th century. She was one of the most powerful and influential rulers in Scandinavian history. Margaret was born in 1353, the daughter of King Valdemar IV of Denmark. From a very young age, her life was shaped by politics. At the age of 10, she was married to King Haakon VI of Norway and Sweden. This was a political alliance meant to strengthen ties between the kingdoms. Her early life was spent moving between the courts of Scandinavia. She learned the complex politics of the region firsthand. In 1370, she gave birth to her only child, a son named Olaf. This was a crucial event. Olaf was now the heir to the thrones of both Norway and Sweden. In 1375, her father, the King of Denmark, died without a male heir. This created a succession crisis. Margaret, acting quickly and skillfully, had her 5-year-old son Olaf elected as the King of Denmark. Since he was a child, she was appointed as his regent. She was now the de facto ruler of Denmark. A few years later, in 1380, her husband, King Haakon of Norway, died. Her son Olaf inherited the Norwegian throne. Margaret now ruled both Denmark and Norway as regent for her son. She was the most powerful person in Scandinavia. Tragedy struck in 1387. Her son Olaf died unexpectedly at the age of 17. This was a devastating personal loss, but it also created a huge political problem. She had no direct heir. Her power was based on her role as regent for her son. With him gone, her position was precarious, but Margaret had spent years building up a powerful base of support. The nobles of Denmark recognized that she was the only one who could hold the kingdom together. They named her all-powerful lady and master and regent of the Kingdom of Denmark. The next year, Norway did the same. She was now the official ruler of both kingdoms, not as a regent for a child, but in her own right. Her next goal was Sweden. The Swedish nobility was unhappy with their king, Albert of Mecklenburg. They invited Margaret to intervene. In 1389, her forces defeated King Albert's army. She was recognized as the ruler of Sweden. For the first time, all three major Scandinavian kingdoms were under the control of a single person. Margaret knew that her personal rule was not a permanent solution. She needed an heir to secure the future of her united Scandinavia. She adopted her grandnephew, a young boy named Eric of Pomerania. She spent the next several years grooming him to be king and consolidating her union. Her masterpiece was the Kalmar Union, formally established in 1397. At a meeting in the Swedish city of Kalmar, representatives from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden agreed to a treaty. The three kingdoms would be united under a single monarch, starting with Eric. However, each kingdom would retain its own laws and councils. It was a personal union, not a complete merger. Eric was crowned king of all three realms, but Margaret, even though her adopted son was now officially the king, remained the true power behind the throne. She continued to manage the affairs of the union until her death. She was the one making the decisions. Margaret was a brilliant administrator. She reformed the currency. She reclaimed crown lands that had been sold off to nobles, strengthening the power and wealth of the monarchy. She was a tough negotiator who preferred diplomacy to war. She managed to keep the powerful and often rebellious nobles of three different kingdoms in line. She was a pragmatist who understood the art of compromise. She died in 1412 on a ship in Flensburg harbor, reportedly from the plague, while negotiating a treaty. She had ruled for over 25 years and had achieved something extraordinary. She had united Scandinavia peacefully, creating a powerful northern European bloc that lasted in various forms for over a century. Despite her immense power and success, she was always careful with her titles. She called herself Margaret, by the grace of God, daughter of Valdemar, King of Denmark. She never officially took the title of Queen Regnant. She understood that her power came from her skill and her ability to build consensus, not from a fancy title that might have alienated the powerful men around her. She is remembered as Margaret the Great, a ruler who brought peace and unity to a fractured region through sheer political genius. Number 8. Who was the warrior queen of the Italian Renaissance? She was a master of military strategy who famously defended her city against a powerful enemy army. She was an expert in alchemy and herbal remedies, creating recipes for cosmetics and medicines. She was the mother of the famous condottiero Giovanni dalle Bandiere and the grandmother of Cosimo I de' Medici, the first Grand Duke of Tuscany. Her name was Caterina Sforza, and she was one of the most formidable women of the Italian Renaissance. She was known for her courage, her intelligence, and her refusal to be intimidated. Caterina was born in 1463, the illegitimate daughter of Galeazzo Maria Sforza, who would later become the Duke of Milan. Even though she was illegitimate, she was raised in the sophisticated and ruthless world of the Milanese court. She received an excellent education, learning Latin and studying the classics. She was also trained in hunting and warfare. At the age of 14, she was married to Girolamo Riario, a nephew of Pope Sixtus IV. This was a political marriage designed to cement an alliance between Milan and the papacy. Her husband was made the lord of the cities of Imola and Forli in the Romagna region of Italy. Caterina and her husband lived in Rome for a time. But in 1484, Pope Sixtus IV died. The city of Rome erupted into chaos. Rival families and mobs took to the streets. While her husband despaired, the 21-year-old Caterina took action. She was 7 months pregnant at the time. She rode on horseback to the Castel Sant'Angelo, the papal fortress, and seized control of it. She then used the fortress's cannons to threaten the Vatican and the College of Cardinals. Her goal was to force the cardinals to negotiate with her and her husband and guarantee their continued rule in Imola and Forli. Her bold move worked. The cardinals gave in to her demands. She and her husband returned to Forli, but Girolamo was an unpopular and cruel ruler. In 1488, a group of conspirators from a rival family, the Orsi, assassinated him in the palace. They threw his body into the main square. The conspirators captured Caterina and her 6 children. They held them hostage and demanded that the commander of the city's main fortress, the Rocca di Ravaldino, surrender. The commander refused. He was loyal to Caterina. The conspirators threatened to kill her children if she didn't order the commander to stand down. This is the moment of her most famous, though possibly legendary, act of defiance. The story goes that Caterina was allowed to go to the fortress to persuade the commander. She left her children behind as hostages. Once inside the fortress, she went up to the walls. When the Orsi brothers shouted that they would kill her children, she lifted her skirts, exposed herself to them, and shouted back that she had the means to make more children. Whether this dramatic gesture actually happened is debated, but the core of the story is true. She refused to surrender the fortress. Her defiance bought her time. Her uncle Ludovico Sforza, the ruler of Milan, sent an army to relieve her. The conspiracy collapsed, and Caterina regained control of Forli. She ruled as regent for her young son Ottaviano. For the next decade, she ruled Imola and Forli. She was a capable ruler, but she had to navigate the treacherous world of Italian politics, which was full of shifting alliances and betrayals. Her greatest test came in 1499. The powerful and ruthless Cesare Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI, launched a campaign to carve out a kingdom for himself in central Italy. His army, backed by French forces, was sweeping through the region. He targeted Caterina's lands. Many rulers in the area surrendered without a fight. Not Caterina. She sent her children to safety in Florence and prepared to defend her city of Forli. She personally supervised the strengthening of the city's defenses. She gathered supplies and trained her soldiers. When Cesare Borgia's army arrived, they laid siege to the city. Caterina led the defense from the walls of the Rocca di Ravaldino. She was an active commander, directing cannon fire and encouraging her troops. For several weeks, she and her small garrison held off the much larger Borgia army. Her resistance became famous throughout Italy. Ultimately, the fortress fell. Borgia's artillery breached the walls, and his troops stormed the stronghold. Caterina fought until the very end, but she was eventually captured. She was taken to Rome as a prisoner. Cesare Borgia paraded her through the city as a trophy. She was imprisoned in the Castel Sant'Angelo, the same fortress she had once commanded. She was eventually released after a year and a half, thanks to the intervention of the French. She spent the last years of her life in Florence, living in a villa that had belonged to one of her later husbands. She focused on her children and her interests in alchemy and botany. She compiled a large book of experiments with recipes for cosmetics, medicines, and poisons. Caterina Sforza died in 1509 at the age of 46. She was a true product of the Renaissance, a woman who was both a patron of the arts and a warrior. She was intelligent, ruthless, and incredibly brave. In a world dominated by powerful men, she refused to be a pawn. She was a player in the great game of Italian politics, and she played it with remarkable courage and skill. Number 7. Could a teenage girl have ruled an empire? She was chosen as the Sultan of Delhi at the age of 26. She was the first and only female monarch to ever rule the Delhi Sultanate. She insisted on being called Sultan, not Sultana, because she said Sultana was a title for a king's wife, and she was the ruler. Her name was Razia, and she reigned over a vast territory in the Indian subcontinent in the 13th century. Her rule was short, only about 4 years, but it was a remarkable challenge to the conventions of her time. Razia was born in 1205. Her father was Shams-ud-Din Iltutmish, the third ruler of the Mamluk dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate. Iltutmish was a brilliant ruler who consolidated and expanded the Sultanate. Unlike most rulers of his time, he saw something special in his daughter. While his sons were indulging in the pleasures of the court, Razia was being trained in statecraft and warfare. She would often sit with her father in his court and learn how to manage the kingdom. Iltutmish had several sons, but he considered them incompetent and unfit to rule. Before he died, he did something extraordinary. He nominated Razia as his successor. The nobles and court officials were shocked. They protested. A woman had never ruled them before, but Iltutmish was firm. He told them that his daughter was more capable than all of his sons put together. When Iltutmish died in 1236, the nobles ignored his wishes. They placed his eldest surviving son, Ruknud din Firuz, on the throne. He was a terrible ruler. He spent his time on personal pleasures and left the running of the government to his mother, who was a cruel and manipulative woman. The kingdom quickly descended into chaos. The people of Delhi were disgusted. Razia saw her chance. One Friday, at the congregational prayers, she appeared before the public. She spoke to them directly, reminding them of her father's wish and highlighting the incompetence of her brother's rule. The people of Delhi, who remembered her father's just reign, rallied to her side. They stormed the palace and deposed her brother. Razia was placed on the throne. As Sultan, Razia was a strong and effective ruler. She abandoned the traditional female attire of the court. She wore a tunic and a headdress, just like a male ruler. She rode an elephant in public, showing her face to her subjects. This was a scandalous break with tradition where royal women were expected to live in seclusion. But Razia understood that to rule, she had to be seen as a ruler, not as a woman. She worked hard to restore order to the kingdom. She established law and order, built roads, dug wells, and supported poets, painters, and scholars. She was a patron of learning and established schools and libraries. She was a good military leader and successfully defended her kingdom against external threats. But she faced constant opposition from within. A powerful group of Turkic nobles, known as the 40, had become very influential during her father's reign. They could not accept being ruled by a woman. They saw her as a threat to their power and privilege. They constantly plotted against her. Razia tried to break their power by creating a new class of non-Turkic nobles who would be loyal to her. Her biggest mistake in the eyes of the nobles was her close relationship with an Abyssinian slave named Jamal ud Din Yacht. She appointed him to the high-ranking position of master of the royal stables. Her enemies used this to spread rumors that they were having an affair. This was probably just propaganda, a way to damage her reputation, but it worked. The Turkic nobles saw it as an outrage that she would favor a non-Turk over them. In 1240, the nobles, led by the governor of Bathinda, Malik Ikhtiar ud Din Altunya, openly rebelled. Razia marched out with her army to confront them. While she was away, the nobles in Delhi took the opportunity to enthrone her other brother, Muizuddin Bahram Shah. Razia's army was defeated in battle. Her trusted advisor, Yacht, was killed. Razia herself was captured and imprisoned by Altunya. It seemed like her reign was over, but Razia was a clever political operator. From her prison cell, she managed to do the unexpected. She married her captor, Altunya. It's unclear if it was for love or for political advantage, but it was a brilliant move. For Altunya, who had probably hoped to gain more power from the rebellion and was disappointed, decided to join forces with his new wife. And together, they raised a new army and marched on Delhi to try and reclaim the throne. They were defeated by her brother's forces. They were forced to flee. According to most accounts, they were robbed and killed by local people while they were resting. Razia was only 35 years old. Her reign was a brief but brilliant flash. She was a talented and just ruler who was ultimately brought down by the prejudice of the powerful nobles around her. They could not accept a woman, especially one who refused to play by their rules, as their superior. Her story is a powerful reminder of the challenges faced by women who dare to take on roles that society has reserved for men. Number 6. What if your husband was your co-ruler, not the other way around? She was queen of 2 different kingdoms, France and England, in her lifetime. 2 of her sons became kings of England, and 1 of her daughters became Queen of Castile. She was a major patron of the arts and literature, helping to shape the culture of courtly love. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and influential women of the High Middle Ages. Her life spanned 82 years, an incredibly long time for the 12th century, and it was filled with drama, power, and political intrigue. Eleanor was born around 1122. Her father was the Duke of Aquitaine, a vast and wealthy duchy in what is now southwestern France. Aquitaine was richer and larger than the lands directly controlled by the King of France. When her father died, the 15-year-old Eleanor inherited this massive territory. She became the most eligible heiress in Europe. Her guardian, the King of France, quickly arranged for her to marry his own son and heir, Louis. Within months of her father's death, she was married. A few weeks after that, the old king died, and Eleanor's husband became King Louis VII of France. At the age of 15, Eleanor was now the Queen of France. The marriage was not a happy one. Louis was a pious and serious man. Eleanor was high-spirited, intelligent, and worldly. The northern French court was a gloomy place compared to the vibrant, cultured court of Aquitaine she was used to. In 1147, Eleanor joined her husband on the Second Crusade. This was highly unusual for a queen. She brought her own vassals from Aquitaine with her. Her presence on the crusade caused a great deal of scandal and gossip. The crusade itself was a military disaster. During the long and difficult journey, her relationship with Louis completely broke down. They had 2 daughters together, but no sons, which was a major problem for a royal marriage. In 1152, after 15 years of marriage, Eleanor and Louis had their marriage annulled. The official reason was that they were too closely related. But the real reason was their incompatibility and the lack of a male heir. As soon as the marriage was annulled, Eleanor was once again the independent Duchess of Aquitaine. She was also a single woman with a huge territory. This made her vulnerable. She traveled quickly back to her own lands. On the way, several nobles tried to kidnap her and force her into marriage to get control of her duchy. But Eleanor had her own plans. Just 8 weeks after her annulment from the King of France, she married Henry of Anjou. He was 11 years younger than her. He was ambitious, energetic, and a brilliant military leader. He was also in line to become the King of England. 2 years later, in 1154, he was crowned King Henry II of England. Eleanor was now the Queen of England. And together, she and Henry controlled a massive territory that stretched from the borders of Scotland to the Pyrenees Mountains in Spain. It was later called the Angevin Empire. For the first, decade or so of their marriage, they were a formidable team. They traveled constantly throughout their vast domains, administering justice and consolidating their power. Eleanor gave birth to 8 children with Henry, including 5 sons. 2 of those sons, Richard the Lionheart and John, would later become kings of England. But Henry was a controlling and unfaithful husband. As their sons grew up, tensions rose. Henry refused to delegate any real power to them. In 1173, Eleanor and her 3 eldest sons launched a great revolt against Henry. It was a massive family feud that turned into a full-scale war. The revolt failed. Henry defeated his sons and their allies, and he punished his wife severely. He had her imprisoned. For the next 16 years, Eleanor was kept under house arrest at various castles in England. She was a political prisoner held captive by her own husband. Her imprisonment ended in 1189, when Henry II died. Her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, became king. One of his first acts was to free his mother. Even though she was now in her late 60s, Eleanor's political career was far from over. Richard was a great warrior, but he spent very little time in England. He went off on the Third Crusade. While he was away, he left his mother in charge of his kingdom. She ruled England as his regent, governing wisely and keeping her youngest son, the treacherous John, from seizing the throne. When Richard was captured and held for ransom on his way back from the crusade, it was Eleanor who raised the enormous sum of money needed to free him. She traveled across Germany to deliver the ransom in person and bring her son home. After Richard died in 1199, her son John became king. Eleanor continued to be a powerful political force. In her late 70s, she traveled across the Pyrenees Mountains to the Kingdom of Castile to choose one of her granddaughters to marry the heir to the French throne. It was a crucial diplomatic mission. She died in 1204 at the age of 82. She was buried at Fontevraud Abbey next to her husband Henry and her son Richard. Eleanor of Aquitaine's life was extraordinary. She was a duchess in her own right, a queen of 2 countries, a crusader, a political prisoner, and a regent. She was a woman who exercised immense power in a man's world, shaping the politics and culture of Europe for decades. Number 5, could a single treaty lead to a queen's downfall? She was a modernizer who tried to strengthen her nation against foreign influence. She brought in foreign advisors to reform her military and government. She was a shrewd political operator who played rival foreign powers against each other. But a single diplomatic miscalculation led to her tragic end. Her name was Myeongjong, and she was the last queen of Korea's Joseon dynasty. She is often referred to as Queen Min. Her story is one of a brilliant political mind fighting to preserve her nation's independence in an era of intense imperial competition. She was born in 1851 into a noble family. At the age of 15, she was chosen to be the wife of the 15-year-old King Gojong. At first, she was just the queen consort. The real power was held by the king's father, the Hyungseon Daewongun, who was ruling as regent. The Daewongun was a staunch isolationist. He wanted to keep Korea closed off from the outside world and resist all foreign influence. Queen Min had different ideas. She was intelligent and ambitious. She read widely and taught herself about international politics. She believed that Korea could not afford to remain isolated. She thought the only way for Korea to survive was to modernize and engage with the world, but on its own terms. She began to build her own political faction at court, made up of her relatives and others who supported her vision. In 1873, she succeeded in ousting her father-in-law from power. Her husband, King Gojong, now ruled in his own right, but the queen was the dominant political force behind the throne. Her main policy was to open Korea up to the world, but carefully. She tried to balance the influence of the major powers in the region, China, Japan, and Russia. For centuries, Korea had been a tributary state of China, but Japan, which had modernized rapidly after the Meiji Restoration, was becoming more aggressive, and Russia was expanding its influence in the Far East. Queen Min initially saw Japan as a model for modernization. In 1876, Korea signed the Treaty of Ganghwa with Japan, which opened up several Korean ports to Japanese trade. This was Korea's first modern treaty with a foreign power. The Queen then began to implement reforms. She created a new elite military unit, the Byeolgigun, which was trained by a Japanese officer. She sent missions to Japan and the United States to learn about their technology and institutions. But her reforms were expensive and caused resentment. In 1882, soldiers from the old army who were unpaid and angry about the favoritism shown to the new Japanese-trained unit rioted. They attacked the Japanese legation and stormed the palace. The queen narrowly escaped, disguised as a court lady. Her father-in-law, the Daewongun, briefly retook power. But China, not wanting to see Japan gain influence, sent troops to Korea. They suppressed the riot, arrested the Daewongun, and restored the queen to power. This event showed the queen that Japan was a dangerous and aggressive neighbor. Her policy shifted. She began to lean more towards China and also tried to cultivate a relationship with Russia as a counterbalance to Japanese power. This infuriated the Japanese. They saw Queen Min as the main obstacle to their ambitions of controlling Korea. The rivalry between China and Japan over Korea eventually led to the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894. Japan won a swift and decisive victory. The war ended Chinese influence in Korea. Japan was now the dominant power on the peninsula. They installed a pro-Japanese government in Seoul. Queen Min was not one to give up. She recognized the new threat and began to work against the Japanese behind the scenes. She made secret contacts with the Russian representatives in Seoul. She was trying to build a new alliance with Russia to drive out the Japanese. The Japanese minister in Seoul, Muragoro, saw the queen as a serious threat. He believed that as long as she was alive, Japan would never be able to fully control Korea. So he orchestrated a plan to remove her. On October 8th, 1895, a group of Japanese soldiers and Ronin, along with some pro-Japanese Korean collaborators, stormed the Gyeongbok Palace. They overcame the palace guards and made their way to the queen's quarters. They found her and a few of her court ladies. They killed the queen. To destroy the evidence, they took her body to a nearby forest, doused it in oil, and burned it. The assassination of the queen caused outrage in Korea and around the world. It backfired on the Japanese. King Gojong, fearing for his own life, fled to the Russian legation for protection. Public opinion in Korea turned sharply against the Japanese. The pro-Japanese government they had installed collapsed. Russian influence in Korea grew, which was the exact opposite of what the assassins had intended. Queen Min's death marked a turning point. It accelerated the decline of the Joseon dynasty and the loss of Korean independence. A little over a decade later, in 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, beginning a long and difficult period of colonial rule. Ma Yonggseong was a complex and controversial figure. Her enemies portrayed her as corrupt and power-hungry. But she was also a patriot who fought to modernize her country and protect its sovereignty against overwhelming odds. She was a brilliant political strategist who was ultimately killed for being too successful in thwarting the ambitions of a more powerful neighbor. Number 4, did two sisters lead a nation's first rebellion? They were noblewomen who led a major uprising against foreign rule in the 1st century CE. One of them was proclaimed queen of an independent state. Their rebellion lasted for 3 years and is remembered as a foundational moment in their country's struggle for independence. There were the Trung sisters, Trung Trac and Trung Nhi, and they are national heroes in Vietnam. Their story is one of resistance against the powerful Han Dynasty of China, which had ruled Vietnam for over a century. The Trung sisters were born in the early 1st century in Giao Chi, a province in the northern part of modern Vietnam. They were the daughters of a powerful local lord. They were raised in a society where women had more freedom and authority than in the patriarchal Han Chinese culture. They learned martial arts and the arts of war. Trung Trac married a man named Thisak, who was also a local lord. He was a vocal opponent of the increasingly harsh Chinese rule. The Han governor of the province, a man named Su Ding, was known for his cruelty and his heavy taxes. He tried to force the Vietnamese people to assimilate into Chinese culture. Around 40 CE, Su Ding had Thisak executed. The reasons are not entirely clear, but it was likely a move to eliminate a potential leader of a rebellion. The execution of her husband was the final straw for Trung Trac, but her motivation was not just personal revenge. It was a call to action for her entire people. She and her sister Trung Nhi began to rally the local lords and the common people. They traveled from village to village, calling for an uprising to drive out the Han. An old Vietnamese history text says that Trung Trac, in a speech to her followers, gave 4 reasons for her rebellion. First, to avenge her country's wrongs. Second, to restore the ancestral lands of the Han kings. Third, to avenge the death of her husband. And fourth, to see her own ambitions fulfilled. Thousands of people, including many women, flocked to their banner. The rebellion began. Trung Trac was the main leader, and Trung Nhi was her top general. Their army, in a very short time, managed to capture more than 65 towns and citadels from the Chinese. They drove the governor, Su Ding, out of the province. The uprising was a stunning success. With the Han administrators gone, the Vietnamese leaders declared Trung Trac as their queen. She established her court at My Linh. For a brief period, Vietnam was an independent state again, ruled by a queen. The news of the rebellion shocked the Han court in China. Emperor Guangwu could not allow such a valuable southern province to break away. He ordered one of his best generals, a veteran commander named Ma Yuan, to lead a massive army to crush the rebellion. Ma Yuan's army was huge and well-equipped. They marched south. The Trung sisters gathered their own forces to meet the invasion. For a while, they fought a successful guerrilla campaign, but the professional Han army was a formidable opponent. In 43 CE, Ma Yuan's army engaged the sisters' main force in a decisive battle. The Vietnamese army was defeated. According to traditional Vietnamese accounts, the Trung sisters, facing capture, chose to take their own lives rather than be taken prisoner. They are said to have drowned themselves in the Hat River. After their deaths, the rebellion collapsed. The Hanrei established their control over Vietnam. Their rule became even harsher than before. But the story of the Trung sisters was never forgotten. Their rebellion, though it ultimately failed, was the first major uprising against Chinese rule in Vietnam. It showed that the Vietnamese people would not passively accept foreign domination. The sisters became powerful symbols of national pride and resistance. Throughout Vietnamese history, whenever there was a struggle for independence, the story of the Trung sisters was invoked to inspire the people. Their temples were built in their honor all over the country. An annual holiday still celebrates their memory. They are remembered not just as rebels, but as the first queens of an independent Vietnam, two women who dared to challenge an empire. Number 3, could a queen be a king? She built one of the greatest architectural wonders of her time, the Silla Kingdom's Stargazing Tower. She ruled during a period of intense conflict and laid the diplomatic and cultural foundations for the eventual unification of the Korean peninsula. She was the first of 3 female rulers in her kingdom's history. Her name was Syeondeok, and she was the 27th ruler of the Kingdom of Silla, one of the 3 kingdoms of ancient Korea. While she reigned from 632 to 647 CE, her reign was a testament to the power of intelligence and diplomacy in a time of war. Syeondeok was born as Princess Deokmin. Her father was King Jimpyong. He had no sons. In the rigid social structure of Silla, which was based on a bone rank system, the purity of one's bloodline was everything. Since there was no male heir with the highest sacred bone rank, the king chose his eldest daughter, Deokmin, to be his successor. This was a controversial choice. Some of the male aristocrats objected, but King Jimpyong had groomed his daughter for leadership. She was known for her intelligence and her sharp judgment. When he died in 632, she ascended the throne. She took the name Queen Syeondeok. Her reign was a difficult one. Silla was the smallest and, at the time, weakest of the 3 kingdoms. It was constantly under attack from its larger and more aggressive neighbors, Baekje, to the west and Goguryeo to the north. The first year of her reign saw a major invasion from Baekje. Syeondeok could not afford to be a weak ruler. She had to prove to the skeptical male nobility that she was capable of defending the kingdom. She did this not just through military force, but through clever diplomacy and strategic alliances. She sent envoys to Tang China, which was the superpower of the region. She built a strong relationship with the Tang Emperor Taizong. This alliance was crucial. It provided Silla with a powerful ally that could help put pressure on its rivals. She also focused on strengthening the kingdom from within. She was a devout Buddhist, and she promoted Buddhism as a state religion. This was a way to create a sense of national unity and cultural identity. She commissioned the construction of many famous temples, including the magnificent 9-story pagoda at Hwangryongsa. This pagoda was one of the tallest wooden structures in the world at the time. It was built as a symbol of Silla's ambition and as a spiritual defense for the nation, with each of its 9 stories representing one of the peoples Silla would eventually subdue. Her most famous architectural achievement is the Gyeomsongdae, or the Stargazing Tower, in the Silla capital of Jeongju. It is the oldest surviving astronomical observatory in East Asia. It was a place for observing the stars, which was important for both agriculture and astrology. But it was also a powerful symbol. It showed that Silla was a kingdom of science, learning, and culture, not just a state of warriors. It was a statement of Silla's sophistication. Queen Syeondeok was also known for her legendary wisdom. There are many stories in the Samguk Sagi, a historical record of the 3 kingdoms, that illustrate her intelligence. One story tells of how the Tang Emperor sent her a gift of peony seeds and a painting of the flowers. When she saw the painting, she remarked that the flowers were beautiful, but it was a pity they had no fragrance. When the seeds were planted and the flowers bloomed, they indeed had no scent. When asked how she knew, she explained that if the flowers had a scent, there would have been bees and butterflies in the painting. Despite her successes, her reign was not without challenges. In the last year of her life, she faced a major rebellion led by a high-ranking nobleman named Beedom. He used the pretext that a woman cannot rule the country to rally support. The rebellion was a serious threat, but it was eventually crushed by her loyal general, Kim Yushin, who would later become a hero of Korean unification. Queen Sandiak died just before the rebellion was fully suppressed. Her legacy is immense. She successfully defended her kingdom during a period of intense crisis. Her diplomatic alliance with Tang China laid the groundwork for Scylla's eventual conquest of the other two kingdoms and the unification of Korea under her successors. She promoted a cultural and religious identity that helped unify her people. She proved that a woman could not only rule, but could rule wisely and effectively, even in the most challenging of times. Number 2, what does it mean to be the mother of the nation? She was the first empress of a unified Ethiopia. She was a key advisor to her husband during a period of massive modernization and expansion. She had to flee her home as a young girl when a rival emperor came to power. Her name was Menen Asfaw, and she was the empress consort of Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. Her life spanned a tumultuous period of Ethiopian history, from the age of feudal lords to the modern era, including the Italian invasion and years of exile. Menen was born in 1891 in the Wollo province of northern Ethiopia. She was from a powerful and influential family. Her grandfather was a local ruler, and she was well connected to the country's aristocracy. Her early life was shaped by the complex politics of the region. She was married twice before she met the man who would become Haile Selassie. Her third marriage in 1911 was to Dehasmak Tafari Makonnen, the future emperor. It was a political match arranged to create an alliance between their powerful families, but it grew into a strong and lasting partnership. They had 6 children who survived to adulthood. In the early years of their marriage, her husband's political star was rising. He became the regent for the Empress Zewditu in 1916. Menen was his closest advisor. She was known for her intelligence, her piety, and her calm demeanor. She was a devout member of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, and her faith was a central part of her life. In 1930, Empress Zewditu died, and her husband was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie. Menen was crowned as empress. She was the first empress of a fully unified and internationally recognized Ethiopian empire. As empress, she took on a public role that was different from that of previous empresses. She was not just a figure within the palace, she was a patron of education, health, and social welfare. She sponsored the construction of the first high school for girls in Ethiopia, the Empress Menen School. She was the patron of the Ethiopian Red Cross and many other charitable organizations. She understood the importance of educating women and improving the lives of ordinary Ethiopians. Her life and the life of her nation was turned upside down in 1935 when fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. The Italian army used modern weapons, including airplanes and poison gas, against the Ethiopian forces. The emperor led the resistance, but the odds were overwhelming. In 1936, the emperor made the difficult decision to go into exile to plead Ethiopia's case before the League of Nations. Empress Menen and the royal family accompanied him. They lived in exile for 5 years, mainly in Bath, England. This was a difficult time for them. They had lost their country. The empress was deeply worried about her people and the children she had to leave behind. During this time, she prayed constantly for the liberation of her country. During World War II, Ethiopia became one of the fronts in the war. The British and Commonwealth forces, along with Ethiopian patriots who had been fighting a guerrilla war since the invasion, launched a campaign to drive the Italians out. In 1941, the campaign was successful. Ethiopia was liberated. Haile Selassie returned to his capital, Addis Ababa, in triumph. And Empress Menen and the rest of the family followed a few months later. Their return was a moment of great national celebration. After the restoration, the empress redoubled her efforts in social work. She focused on helping those who had been affected by the war, including orphans and wounded soldiers. She continued her patronage of schools and churches. She was seen as a symbol of maternal care and national unity, a calm and dignified presence at the center of the nation. She was often referred to as the mother of the nation. She was a traditional woman in many ways, but she also embraced the need for modernization. She supported her husband's reforms and understood the importance of Ethiopia's place in the world. She traveled with him on state visits, meeting with world leaders. Empress Menen died in 1962 after a long illness. Her death was a cause for national mourning. She had been the empress for over 30 years. She had seen her country through war, invasion, exile, and liberation. She was a figure of stability and grace in a century of radical change. She was a quiet force, a partner to the emperor who dedicated her life to her faith, her family, and her nation. Number one, did a queen's stubbornness save her country? She insisted on isolating her country from all foreign influence, even at great cost. Her reign of 33 years was one of the longest in her nation's history. European accounts of her rule painted her as a monster, but in her own country, she is often seen as a strong leader who protected her nation's sovereignty. Her name was Ranavalona I, and she was the queen of the kingdom of Madagascar from 1828 to 1861. Her reign was defined by her fierce resistance to European colonialism and her determination to maintain Malagasy traditions and independence. Ranavalona was born in 1788. She was not of royal blood, but her father had uncovered a plot against the future king, Andre Namponimerina. As a reward, the king adopted Ranavalona as his own daughter and arranged for her to marry his son and heir, Radama. When Radama became king, he was very open to European influence. He invited British and French missionaries, traders, and advisors to Madagascar. He modernized the army with European help. He encouraged the missionaries to set up schools and to create a written form for the Malagasy language. Ranavalona was part of a more traditionalist faction at court that was suspicious of these changes. She saw the growing European influence as a threat to Malagasy customs and independence. In 1828, King Radama I died. There was a power struggle for the throne. Radama had named his daughter as his heir, but the traditionalist faction at court, with Ranavalona as their leader, acted quickly. They eliminated their rivals and declared Ranavalona as the new queen. As soon as she took power, she began to reverse her late husband's policies. She gave a public speech where she declared that she would not be ruled by foreigners. She said, "Never say, she is only a weak and ignorant woman. How can she rule such a vast empire? I will rule here, to the good of my people and the glory of my name. I will worship no other gods than those of my ancestors. The ocean shall be the boundary of my realm, and I will not cede the thickness of one hair of my realm." Her main goal was self-sufficiency. She wanted Madagascar to be able to stand on its own without relying on, foreign trade or technology. She expelled most of the foreign missionaries. She put strict limits on foreign traders. She ended treaties her husband had made with Britain and France. She also took action against the growing number of Malagasy Christians. She saw Christianity as a foreign belief that undermined her authority and the traditional Malagasy religion. In 1835, she issued an edict banning the practice of Christianity. Malagasy Christians were persecuted. Many were executed. This is one of the main reasons she was vilified by European writers at the time. Her policies led to conflict with the European powers. The British and French were not happy about being kicked out. In 1845, a joint British and French naval force attacked the port of Tamatave, but Ranavalona's army, which she had kept well trained and supplied, successfully defended the port. They defeated the European force. It was a major victory that reinforced her isolationist policies. To achieve self-sufficiency, she needed to develop local industries. She enlisted a French castaway named Jean Laborde, who had shipwrecked on the island. He was a brilliant engineer. Under the Queen's direction, he set up a massive industrial complex. They built factories that produced soap, cloth, tools, bricks, and even firearms, cannons, and gunpowder. Madagascar, cut off from most foreign trade, was producing its own modern weapons. Her reign was a difficult one for her people. Her policies were often harsh. She used forced labor called fanampuana for her building projects and to keep her army supplied. She also relied on the traditional practice of trial by ordeal, using the poison of the tingena nut to determine a person's guilt or innocence. Many people died from this practice, but from another perspective, her policies were successful. For the 33 years of her reign, she kept the European colonial powers at bay. At a time when Europe was carving up Africa, Madagascar remained an independent and sovereign nation. Well, she did this through a combination of military strength, industrial development, and sheer force of will. When she died in 1861, her son became king. He reversed her policies and reopened the country to Europeans. This ultimately led to the French conquest of Madagascar in the 1890s. Ranavalona I is a very complex figure. The European accounts from her lifetime describe her as a cruel and bloodthirsty tyrant, but in Madagascar she is often remembered as a strong and patriotic queen who protected her country from foreign domination for over 3 decades. Her story challenges us to look at history from different perspectives. Was she a monster or a patriot? The answer depends on who is telling the story.